Elliot Vanford and Celeste Vanford, two names that once symbolized power, wealth, and the perfect marriage. He was the billionaire tech mogul, a visionary in the business world. She was the devoted wife, expecting their first child, believing in the fairy tale they had built together. But behind the polished image of success, Elliot was hiding a devastating secret. A secret that would unravel his empire, expose his betrayal, and leave him with nothing. By the time he realized his mistake, it was too late, because Celeste wasn't just a scorned wife. She was the storm he never saw coming. Elliot Vanford was the kind of man people admired. He had built his billion-dollar empire from the ground up, turning Vanford Innovations into one of the most powerful tech companies in the world. His name was synonymous with success, his face regularly appearing on magazine covers and business panels. He had everything: power, wealth, and influence. But most importantly, he had a beautiful wife, Celeste Vanford, and they were expecting their first child. To outsiders, their life seemed perfect, a fairy tale wrapped in luxury and prestige. Celeste had always believed in Elliot. She had supported him when he was just a young entrepreneur with big dreams, standing by his side through the long hours, the late-night meetings, and the high-stress deals. She knew what it meant to be married to a man like Elliot, a man who thrived on ambition and was always reaching for the next big achievement. But despite his demanding schedule, he had always made time for her. Their love had been built on trust, or so she thought. Pregnancy had brought a new kind of joy to Celeste's life. She had imagined the future, their child growing up in a loving home, Elliot being a devoted father, the two of them raising their baby together in their grand estate in New York. She had spent months preparing the nursery, picking out soft, pastel colors, choosing the perfect crib, and carefully selecting baby clothes. Elliot had seemed just as excited, attending doctor's appointments when he could, placing his hand on her belly to feel the baby kick, whispering promises of a beautiful life ahead. But something had changed in the last few months. Elliot had become distant, his presence at home reduced to brief appearances before disappearing again into his world of high-stakes business. At first, Celeste told herself it was temporary. The launch of Vanford Innovations' latest AI technology was dominating his time. He was under pressure from investors, making last-minute trips to secure deals. It was all for their future, she reminded herself. Then came the missed calls, the unanswered texts, and the late-night returns with vague explanations. He would tell her he had been in meetings, that a sudden issue had come up, that he was too exhausted to talk. When Celeste asked why he seemed so detached, he reassured her with tired smiles and promises that everything was fine. But she knew something was wrong. She could feel it in the way he avoided her gaze, in the way he no longer asked about the baby, in the way he seemed to be elsewhere even when he was sitting in the same room. Celeste tried to ignore the nagging feeling in her gut, but it grew stronger with every passing day. Then, small details began to surface, tiny cracks in the perfect life they had built. A faint, unfamiliar perfume on his suit, charges on their credit card for high-end restaurants he had never mentioned, a business trip that had been scheduled for one city but later turned out to be in another. Her mind struggled to find logical explanations. Elliot had always been faithful, hadn't he? He had never given her a reason to doubt him before. Maybe she was just overthinking things, the stress of pregnancy making her paranoid. But deep down, a voice whispered that she wasn't imagining it. Something was happening, something he wasn't telling her. One evening, as she sat alone in their sprawling mansion, the silence around her felt suffocating. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the steady kicks of the baby inside her, and a wave of sadness washed over her. She had always envisioned this time in her life as one filled with love and excitement, yet here she was, feeling lonelier than ever. She needed answers, and if Elliot wasn't going to give them to her, she would find them herself. Celeste sat in their dimly lit bedroom, her laptop resting on her lap as she scrolled through their financial records. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what she was about to uncover. She had never been the kind of wife who monitored her husband's spending, but something in her gut told her to look closer. Her heart pounded as she opened their shared account statements. Large transactions from high-end boutiques, five-star restaurants, and luxury hotels popped up, many of them in cities Elliot had never mentioned visiting. A recent charge caught her eye, an extravagant purchase from an exclusive jewelry store in Paris. She had never received a gift from this place, and the date of the transaction coincided with a business trip he had claimed was in London. Cold chill ran down her spine. She clicked on their private jet service's online portal and entered Elliot's membership details. A travel itinerary loaded on the screen, confirming a flight scheduled to leave in less than 2 hours. Destination: Paris. Passenger: Elliot Vanford. No return date was listed. Shock flooded her system. He had never mentioned Paris. In fact, he had told her he had an important investor meeting in Chicago. Her hands clenched into fists. This wasn't an accident, a misunderstanding, or a business obligation. This was deliberate deception. Determined, she reached for her phone and dialed a number she had never thought she would need. Raoul Dempsey, a well-known private investigator, answered within seconds. Celeste didn't waste time explaining. She forwarded him the flight details and financial records, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "Find out everything," she instructed before ending the call. The next few hours passed in agonizing silence. She stared at the screen, waiting for updates. Every minute felt like an eternity. Then, just before midnight, a notification popped up on her phone, a message from Raoul. He's not alone. Attached were blurry but unmistakable images from the airport. Elliot, dressed in a tailored suit, walking alongside a woman with long dark hair. Marissa Laurent. Celeste recognized her instantly. She was a well-known socialite, a model with a questionable reputation, frequently seen at elite parties. A woman who had been photographed with powerful men before, always in the background, always close enough to be noticed, but never officially tied to anyone. But now, she was walking side by side with Celeste's husband, her hand lightly grazing his arm as they moved through the VIP terminal. Celeste's stomach turned. It wasn't just an affair, it was something deeper, something secretive. If this was just about infidelity, why the hidden flights? Why the expensive gifts? Why the lies about where he was supposed to be? Raoul didn't stop at the airport. Hours later, he sent another set of photos. Elliot and Marissa, sitting at an intimate candlelit dinner at one of the most exclusive restaurants in Paris. Her hand resting on his. Him leaning in, whispering something in her ear. They weren't being discreet. It was as if they were in their own world, far from prying eyes. Celeste's breath came in short, uneven bursts as she processed the images. It wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. She thought of their life together, of the nights she had spent alone while he was supposedly working late, of the way he had begun to distance himself from her. Had it all been leading to this moment? Had she been nothing more than an obstacle in his carefully constructed double life? Her hand instinctively went to her stomach, feeling the movement of the baby inside her. The child that Elliot had once claimed to be excited about. The future he had promised her. How easily he had thrown it all away. But Celeste wasn't a woman who crumbled. If Elliot thought he could deceive her, if he believed he could live a secret life without consequences, he had gravely underestimated her. She wiped away a single tear, straightened her back, and opened her laptop again. This wasn't just about catching him. It was about making sure he paid for what he had done. And she was going to ensure that when this was over, Elliot Vanford would regret every single lie he had ever told her. Celeste spent the night staring at the ceiling, her mind racing through every possible scenario. Confronting Elliot wasn't a question of if, but when. The evidence was clear. He had betrayed her in the most elaborate and humiliating way possible. But this wasn't just about the affair anymore. There was something more at play, something she hadn't fully uncovered yet. She wasn't going to act impulsively. She needed to be calculated. The next morning, she met with Raoul in person. The investigator handed her a folder filled with more details about Elliot's trip. There were hotel bookings, high-end shopping receipts, and security footage of Elliot and Marissa moving through Paris without a care in the world. They weren't hiding. It was as if they believed they were untouchable. Celeste studied each image carefully. One particular detail caught her attention: a charge for a luxury yacht rental on the Seine River, scheduled for that very evening. Elliot had told her he was busy with investors in Chicago, yet here he was, preparing for a romantic night in Paris. A storm brewed inside her. She clenched her fists, willing herself to stay calm. Elliot had underestimated her. He had assumed she would never find out, or worse, that she would be too weak to do anything about it. She wasn't going to yell. She wasn't going to cry. She was going to destroy him. Instead of calling him immediately, she decided to play along. She sent him a simple text. "Hope your meetings are going well. Love you." She watched as the message was marked as read almost instantly. No response. An hour later, she received an automatic email notification from their bank. Elliot had withdrawn a significant amount of money from one of their joint accounts, an amount that matched the cost of an expensive diamond bracelet from a Parisian boutique. He was still spending their shared fortune on another woman. Celeste smirked. That was the last time he would ever use her money. She made a call to her lawyer, instructing him to freeze any accounts tied to their marriage. Elliot would find out soon enough that his financial safety net was gone. She wasn't just walking away. She was taking everything he had built with her. As the day passed, she waited for him to slip up further. She knew he would. And by nightfall, Raoul sent her another set of real-time images. Elliot and Marissa boarding the yacht, laughing, sipping champagne. Completely oblivious to what was coming, Celeste decided it was time. She dialed his number, her heart steady. After a few rings, Elliot picked up. His voice was smooth, calm, pretending to be in the middle of a long day. She listened, allowing him to weave his lies, to dig himself deeper into the illusion he thought he had control over. When he finally asked about her day, she delivered the first blow. "I saw the pictures." Silence. Celeste imagined him standing there, phone pressed to his ear, face draining of color, mind scrambling for an excuse. "I know you're in Paris. I know about Marissa. I know everything." Still, no response. Just the sound of his shallow breathing on the other end. "Enjoy the yacht," she added. "It's the last thing you'll be able to afford." Then she hung up. Elliot's empire was already beginning to collapse, and he didn't even know it yet. Celeste had made sure of that. She had taken control of everything: his finances, his company shares, his public reputation. By the time he returned home, there would be nothing left for him to come back to. This wasn't just a confrontation. This was a reckoning. Celeste didn't waste a second after ending the call. She had spent years standing in Elliot's shadow, supporting his ambitions, believing in his dreams, trusting his words. That trust had been shattered, and now she was making sure he felt the full weight of his deception. By the time Elliot stepped off his private jet in New York, he was walking into a life that was no longer his. Celeste had already met with her lawyers and financial advisors, ensuring that his assets tied to their marriage were frozen. Without warning, Elliot found himself locked out of accounts he had assumed were at his disposal. His credit cards declined, his investments under legal scrutiny, his business, once an impenetrable empire, suddenly in jeopardy. As he stormed into their estate, furious and confused, he was met with an envelope waiting for him in the foyer. Inside, neatly laid out, were all the pieces of evidence Celeste had gathered: photos, receipts, travel itineraries, even a copy of the offshore account details she had uncovered through Raoul's deeper investigation. At first, Elliot must have thought she was simply confronting him about the affair. But the final document in the envelope told a much more damning story. The money he had secretly transferred to Marissa's name wasn't just a gift, it was a legal disaster waiting to unfold. The offshore accounts, traced back to fraudulent business dealings, were now flagged for investigation. The walls were closing in on him, and Celeste had made sure there was no escape. While Elliot was still trying to understand how everything had unraveled so quickly, Celeste was already 10 steps ahead. She had scheduled a press leak that would break the news of his affair and questionable business dealings. By morning, headlines would be splashed across every financial and celebrity news outlet. His name would no longer be synonymous with innovation and power. It would be linked to scandal, infidelity, and potential fraud. Elliot tried to do damage control. He called his lawyers, but most refused to take his case once they saw the severity of the situation. His board of directors, already uneasy with recent financial irregularities, wasted no time in scheduling an emergency meeting. Within 24 hours, he was removed as CEO of Vanford Innovations. The company he had built from the ground up was no longer his to control. Marissa, realizing the trouble she was in, vanished. She cut all ties, emptied the offshore account Elliot had set up in her name, and disappeared without a trace. The woman he had risked everything for was gone, leaving him to deal with the consequences alone. Meanwhile, Celeste stood tall, watching it all unfold. She hadn't just exposed his affair, she had dismantled his empire piece by piece. The final blow came when she had the divorce papers delivered to him at his now empty corporate office. He had nothing left to negotiate with. She had ensured that all marital assets favored her, that their unborn child's future was secure, and that he wouldn't be able to rebuild his fortune without a lengthy legal battle. Elliot had thought he could deceive her, manipulate her, and discard her when it suited him. But in the end, he had underestimated the one person who knew him better than anyone. Celeste wasn't just walking away from their marriage, she was walking away with everything he had spent his life trying to build, and this time he had no one to blame but himself. Elliot Vanford sat in the dim light of his now half-empty penthouse, staring at the city skyline. Just weeks ago, he had stood at the top of the world, untouchable, powerful, and in complete control. Now, he was a man with no company, no fortune, and no way out of the mess he had created. His phone had stopped ringing, investors had pulled out, former business partners had distanced themselves, and the media had painted him as both a cheater and a fraud. He had spent years crafting the illusion of a perfect life, a brilliant businessman with a devoted wife, a powerful figure admired in elite circles, and yet, it had all come undone in the span of a few days, destroyed by the very woman he had underestimated. Celeste had left nothing to chance. The media frenzy around the scandal had been relentless. News outlets had covered not only his infidelity, but also the financial discrepancies that had come to light. Authorities were now investigating the offshore accounts linked to his name. While no charges had been filed yet, the threat of a legal battle loomed over him, and Marissa, the woman he had thrown everything away for, had betrayed him in the cruelest way possible. She had taken the money he had hidden for her and vanished. He had tried contacting her, desperate for any kind of support, but every call went unanswered. The last thing he heard was that she had fled to Dubai, living off the fortune he had so foolishly transferred into her name. She had never loved him. She had used him, just as he had used Celeste. But Celeste hadn't just destroyed his finances or his reputation. She had made sure he felt every ounce of humiliation she had endured. The divorce was finalized faster than he had anticipated, thanks to the airtight legal team she had assembled. She had walked away with their mansion, their assets, and the majority of his remaining wealth, all under the legal claim of protecting their unborn child's future. He had no leverage to fight back. Every document he had signed, every careless financial move he had made in the name of secrecy, had only made it easier for her to take everything. And then, as if fate wanted to twist the knife deeper, the final humiliation came. The board of Vanford Innovations had voted unanimously to remove his name from the company altogether. His legacy, the thing he had spent his entire adult life building, no longer bore his mark. The new leadership had distanced themselves from him completely, making it clear that Elliot Vanford was nothing more than a stain on the company's history. As he sat in the empty apartment, the realization settled in. There was no comeback from this. His friends, his allies, even the people who had once admired him, had all turned their backs. There was nothing left to fight for, no way to rebuild what had been lost. Meanwhile, Celeste had moved on, stronger than ever. She had taken control of what was rightfully hers and refused to be defined by betrayal. The world saw her not as a victim, but as a woman who had emerged from the ashes, determined to create a better life for herself and her child. Elliot had thought he could live a double life, deceiving the one person who had stood by him the longest. But in the end, his arrogance had been his downfall. Celeste had been the only real thing in his life, and now she was gone, leaving him to drown in the wreckage of his own making.